I will call on members in alphabetical order. When called on, please say present and note any declarations of interest. If you don't have any declarations of interest, then please just say present. So, Councillor Ahern.
Present.
Councillor Harcourt.
Present.
Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Councillor Carmel.
Present, and as I have done on many occasions before, I would like to state that I have, I know one or more of the objectors, and I have been, however, I do not believe that this will prejudice any decision I might make on this case.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Carmel. Councillor Perez.
Present.
Councillor Sadiq.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Thorley.
Present.
And I am also present and have no interest to declare. Okay, in which case, if I can move on to item number 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of April. So I'll now call on each member in turn to agree the minutes of the previous meeting. If you agree the minutes, please say agreed, and if not, please say not agreed and give a reason why. So, Councillor Ahern.
Agreed.
Councillor Harcourt.
Agreed.
Councillor Harvey.
Agreed.
Councillor Carmel. Councillor Carmel, I think you might have connection issues, so I'm going to come.
I'm just moving closer to my hub. Can I just ask, what was my declaration of interest heard and understood?
Yes, we heard and understood your declaration of interest. Are you happy to agree the minutes of the meeting on the 20th of April?
Agreed.
Councillor Perez.
Agreed.
Councillor Sadiq.
Agreed.
Councillor Thorley.
Agreed.
And I also agree the minutes, which brings us on to our first item for this evening, which is a 32A Verica Road. If I can ask the presenting officer, Tom Scriven, to please introduce the report. And Tom, I'll just give you a moment so that you have time to share your screen with us.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully that's now showing.
Yep, we can see that.
Okay, thank you. This is an application in relation to 32A Verica Road. I will draw your attention to the addendum to the committee report, which includes some alterations and corrections. Paragraph 3.36 was inserted as a conclusion to the heritage considerations, and this sets out that overall there would be no harm to the conservation area. There were also 4 late letters of objection, including a response to the committee report. I also want to highlight that the complete recommendation on the application is set out in full in paragraph 4.1 on page 38 at the end of the report. 32A Verica Road is a single-storey building to the rear of number 32. The building is accessed from Fairholme Road, and the site is situated within the Barons Court Conservation Area. However, the building is not subject to statutory or local listing. The application is for the replacement of the existing roof, including the insertion of 8 skylights to the flat roof. Internally, the proposal would include excavation to provide accommodation across 2 floors at lower ground and basement level. The proposal would also include repairs to brickwork, the parapet and doorway portico, and the replacement of the existing window and door in the front elevation. Here you can see an aerial photo, and the application site can be seen with the arrow in red in the centre of the image, with number 32 Verica Road on the left-hand side here, if you can see my cursor, and number 45 Fairholme Road to the right with the white frontage here. There is an established lawful residential use on the site, which was confirmed through the granting of a lawful development certificate in 2017. The photo on the top left of the slide shows the view of the building in the Fairholme Road street scene. It should be noted that the front elevation is in need of some repair work, and this does form part of the proposal. The photo on the bottom right shows the pre-existing internal situation within the building, which included accommodation across 2 floors. This photo shows the roof of the application site when viewed from the neighbour at number 32. This roof is to be replaced as part of the proposal. This photo shows the rear of the site when viewed from the garden of number 34 Verica Road. There would be no change to this elevation. Just going to go into a bit more detail in terms of the planning history of the site. Members of the committee will be aware that there is an extensive planning history on the site. The current application is the current application under consideration was previously approved, but the decision was quashed due to an error on the decision notice. Therefore, the application is back before the council for determination and has been brought before the committee to consider. The full planning history is set out within paragraphs 1.3 to 1.24 of the officer report. However, the most relevant recent history is summarised within this slide. On the left-hand side, you can see the most recent application, which was considered by Planning Committee in September last year. This included accommodation across 2 floors, as well as an increase in the height of the flat roof to match the ridge height of the existing pitched roof element to the front of the building. This was refused as the proposal was considered to provide an unacceptable standard of residential accommodation for future occupiers, contrary to policy 7.6, the 2016 London Plan. And just on that, the red line here is obviously showing the approximate location of the existing roof. So that was the change to the roof as part of that application. And then you have the accommodation set out across 2 floors. Since the committee decision, there has been an appeal decision on the site, and that was in November 2020, which related to a proposal which included accommodation across 3 floors, as well as the additions to the roof. This was refused by the council as it was considered that the proposal would unacceptably impact the amenity of future occupiers. The appeal against this decision was dismissed by the inspector, who considered that the accommodation across 3 floors provided an unacceptable standard of amenity for future occupiers. The current proposal is shown on the right-hand side. I'll go through the individual plans in a bit more detail later on as I go through each of those, but the main changes from the previous 2 applications is that this application no longer includes any enlargement of the roof, and the accommodation is only set out over 2 floors with the mezzanine level omitted. So the mezzanine is this level in here, which was part of the dismissed appeal decision. The current proposal also includes additional roof lights in the replacement flat roof when compared to the previous applications. In addition to the changes to the proposal itself, it's important to note that a new London plan has been adopted since the previous decisions. Policy 7.6 has now been replaced by policy D3 within the London Plan 2021, which sets out that development should achieve a comfortable living environment for occupiers. In light of the changes that has been made to the proposal and the changes to the London Plan, it is considered that in the context of the existing residential unit on site, the proposal would now provide a suitable standard of accommodation for future occupiers. The full assessment of this element of the proposal is set out within paragraphs 3.4 to 3.14 of the committee report. I'll now just briefly go through the plans for the proposal. So this one shows the existing and proposed front elevation when viewed in the Fairholme Road street scene. You can see from this slide that the overall appearance of the building would remain very similar to the existing, and the main changes in this elevation are the repair works to the wall and the doorway and the replacement of the windows and the door. This is the existing and proposed site. Existing and proposed side elevations of the building when viewed from number 32 Verica Road. And from this, you can see that the scale of the building would not change from this particular aspect. This shows the existing and proposed rear elevation viewed from the garden of number 34 Verica Road. Again, there's no specific alterations to this elevation. This is an existing section of the building with the front elevation shown here. Oh, sorry, just skipped a few by accident. The front elevation's here onto Fairholme Road. This shows the pre-existing building with the accommodation set out across 2 floors, consisting of a lower ground floor level with a mezzanine floor above. So you've got the lower ground floor level, the dotted lines here, and the mezzanine floor level dotted line here. This is the proposed section, which shows that the proposal would be split across 2 levels with accommodation at lower ground floor level and new floor space created at basement level below this. These are the proposed floor plans. On the left is the proposed lower ground floor plan, and on the right is the proposed basement floor plan. On the left, on the proposed lower ground floor plan, you can see the structural glass, which would provide the source of light down from that level into the basement. And then this is the proposed roof plan showing the replacement roof and the 8 new roof lights that would be inserted within that roof. The recommendation is to approve the application subject to the conditions as set out in the officer report and in paragraph 4.1. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Tom. If you wouldn't mind ending your screen share. Now, apologies, everyone. I've been informed that the first couple of items that we had on the agenda were missed from the live stream. So I just need to go back and ask you to do those votes again, just so we can make sure they've been captured. So apologies, I'm going to have to start from the beginning again. So I'm starting from, but Tom, I won't ask you to do your presentation again. So I'm starting from item 1, which was apologies for absence, of which we don't have any. Then item 2, which was roll call and declaration of interest. So again, as I did before, I'm going to ask all members, I'm going to call on you in alphabetical order. And when called on, please say present and note any declarations of interest. If you don't have any declarations of interest, please just say present. And Councillor Carmel, your declarations were slightly unclear, so we'll get you to do those again as well. So Councillor Ahern.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Harcourt.
Present.
Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Councillor Carmel.
Thank you, Chair. As I have mentioned on previous occasions, I am acquainted with one or more of the objectors, and the applicant has been in email contact with me. I have not discussed this specific application with any of the parties involved. Therefore, it is my intention to stay and vote.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carmel. Councillor Perez.
Present.
Councillor Siddiq.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Thorley.
Present.
And I am also present and have no declarations of interest. Okay, in which case then we need to vote on the minutes again. So I'll now call on each member in turn to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. If you agree the minutes, please say agreed. If not, please say not agreed and explain why. So Councillor Ahern.
Agreed.
Councillor Harcourt.
Agreed.
Councillor Harvey.
Agreed.
Councillor Carmel.
Agreed.
Councillor Perez.
Agreed.
Councillor Siddiq.
Agreed.
Councillor Thorley.
Agreed.
And I also agree the minutes. And so that catches us up to when the live stream actually went live. So apologies, everyone. Thank you for your patience there. So we've had our presentation from Tom Scriven, the presenting officer. So I'm now going to move on to our speakers this evening. So just a quick reminder for all of our speakers, if I can just ask that everyone keeps their remarks to the merits or otherwise of the planning application, the specific application before us. So retaining their remarks to planning matters specifically. And just a reminder to all speakers that their allocated time is their only time to address committee, and there's no further opportunity to follow up, either for follow-up, clarification or questions. But thank you to all of our speakers in advance for coming along to address committee this evening. So if I can invite forward, first of all, Mr. David Warman, speaking on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Ensor. Mr. Warman, you've got 2.5 minutes in which to address committee. So thank you for coming along this evening. I will be keeping time and I'll let you know when you've got 30 seconds remaining. And I might need to interrupt you to do that, but I'll make sure I let you know when you've got 30 seconds remaining. So Mr. Warman, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. In substance, this application proposes the same development as the last application for this site you refused only 9 months ago. The sole difference between the schemes relates to the roof design, with reduced glazing and lower roof in this scheme providing even less natural light. This scheme will therefore harm living conditions to an even greater extent than the application which you refused for that reason in September. Your previous decision is a material consideration of great weight given the similarities between the schemes. The difference in design does not in any way overcome that reason for refusal. Nowhere in the officer report is there any analysis of the reasons behind the previous decision or any reasons given why it should now be overturned. The previous refusal was based on policy 7.6, which has now been superseded by D3 in the new London plan. Applying that policy, we would ask you to consider, will this scheme provide appropriate outlook, privacy or amenity for its future occupiers? Will it deliver an environment that is comfortable or inviting for people to use? Is the design of high quality? In our view, the answer to all of these questions is clearly no. It is a poorly designed, substandard application which you should not feel compelled to endorse. It will significantly worsen the existing living conditions at the studio as the excavation takes the floor levels even further from the natural light. That is the conclusion you reached in respect of the most recent application, and nothing has changed to affect that judgment. It remains entirely reasonable and lawful for you to refuse permission based on a breach of policy D3 and the MPPF. This application also breaches DC 11 of the local plan, which imposes a mandatory requirement for a professionally authored CMS. No such statement has been provided. It is not appropriate for this to be dealt with by condition as proposed by officers. The entire purpose of that policy is to ensure that the council are satisfied that the basement construction is acceptable before permission is granted. There is no reason why professionally authored CMS could not have been requested or provided. Contrary to the officer report, this is a clear breach of policy DC 11. For these reasons, we would very respectfully urge you to these proposals and refuse
Mr. Warman, that's 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. I've finished, Chair. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Warman. Okay, great. And thank you for coming along to address committee this evening. So I'd now like to invite Diana Jackson to address committee. Diana, good evening. Welcome to Planning Committee. Diana, again, you've got 2.5 minutes in which to address committee, and I'll let you know when you've got 30 seconds remaining. So if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then whenever you're ready.
Yeah, you can hear me?
We can.
Yes, okay. Good evening. As David just said, without a CMS confirming that the development would safeguard the structure of the studio, and the studio, remember, makes a significant contribution to the character and appearance of the conservation area, it can't be said that it has been shown the development will preserve the character and appearance of the conservation area, as Roy just claimed. Furthermore, there is no condition requiring the facade to be retained because the note that was on the plans requiring this has been removed by the applicant, nor do we know what the impact of the new roof will be. No details are given of the flues, extraction equipment, etc., contrary to DC4. Neither has the proposed heights of the roof or parapet walls been given. All I can say is, so when the dust of the facade has settled, is the developer to choose how high to build the roof? Remember, the plans are the permission. Roy's saying there is no enlargement of the roof will count for nothing. In all of this, have the residents' rights not also been forgotten? The CMS is supposed to be in the public domain. Permitting applicants to pick and choose which requirements they need to follow undermines the whole planning system. Regarding living conditions, the conclusions the committee reached in September are the same as the inspectors. He said, the reduction in the basement level would result in this floor being significantly below the street level window with an intervening floor. Consequently, the dining kitchen area would have no means of outlook. Outlook would not be optimum either from the open plan living area, given its floor level would be significantly below the street window. The overall internal living environment would be oppressive, his words. The only natural
Diana, that's 30 seconds remaining. Please continue.
Yeah, okay. The only natural light to lower basement would be borrowed light through the glass floor. Overall, he did not think there would be adequate levels of light. He commented that a two-storey scheme within the building as is would have its floors better aligned with the street window and give better levels of light. So why build down in a deep hole? It's to enable 3 internal floors. And if this permission were granted, what is there to stop the top floor then being inserted, providing he does that?
Okay, Diana, that's time.
Implementing
Thank you
the
very
permission
much.
for the basements. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana, and thank you to address Planning Committee this evening. If you just can pop your microphone on mute for me, and you might want to switch off your camera as well. But thank you for coming along to committee. Okay, if I can invite forward now Mr. Asambang, the applicant, speaking in support of the application. Mr. Asambang, if you would like to switch on your camera for us, if you'd like to, and to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Mr. Asambang.
Yeah.
We can't see you, but it's okay. If you don't want to be on camera, that's fine. We can hear you perfectly well.
I'm going to just turn my camera back. Right. Any better?
We can't see you, but it's okay. Oh, there you are. Great. We can see you now.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Asambang, thank you for coming along to speak to Planning Committee this evening. You've got 5 minutes in which to address committee, and I'll let you know when you've got 1 minute remaining. So whenever you're ready.
Okay. I purchased this property in 2016, and we're now in 2021. The property has remained empty since 2011, so that's 10 years. And of that 10 years, it's been empty 5 years during my ownership. Obviously, during that time, I've been trying to get planning permission to obviously put the property back into a far better state. I will just jump quickly on the CMS statement as it's been brought up a couple of times. Can I first of all say that I've already got building regulations approval for this property, and I provided a copy of the CMS statements to all members of this committee and the neighbours at 32 Verica Road, even though I do not believe I need to provide that information until I've got my planning permission. It has been provided. And as I stated, with that has also been submitted to the building control, who have in turn approved my building control application. So that's what I would say as far as any concerns about that are concerned. When you look at the current proposal externally, there are absolutely no changes to the external parts, apart from the 8 roof lights that have been fitted in or being proposed to be fitted in. So the building is exactly as it is now, with the main changes being on the internal part. The building, as it currently sits, has an external toilet, and it does have, or it did have mezzanine floor before I took it out, and it had a lower ground floor and a semi-basement. So it had 3 floors, and that's how I bought the building, and I provide enough evidence to support that. After many concerns about the mezzanine floor, that's now been removed. So the internal layout is exactly, with the exception of the mezzanine floor, as it was when I purchased it. This proposal could only allow a maximum of 2 people to habit this property.
Sorry, Mr. Asambang, and I'm really sorry to interrupt, and I'm going to give you your time back, so don't worry. Diana, can I ask that you just switch your camera off for me? Thank you very much. Mr. Asambang, please continue.
Yeah, as it currently stands, this proposal would, allow a maximum of 2 adults to live into this property. And I don't understand where the concerns are regarding the conditions in terms of being habitable or being suitable. Unless the council wants me to leave the property as it is, and if I do that, the conditions are not going to be any better. In fact, they'll be worse. If I were to refurbish the property as it is with a toilet outside the bathroom and the kitchen in the same room with no separation, it'll be worse than what we've currently got. As far as I'm concerned, the current proposal deals away with all of the concern the council had previously, or the local residents. The property has been used as a residential dwelling for some 50 odd years. And as a result of that, it does have certain rights. I just feel that most of the issues that I've had on this property have come from one neighbor, which is the neighbor at 32. And that's the only reason I've had any problems developing this property. As I say, there are absolutely no changes to the external parts. I've heard one of the objectors talking about no details on the roof about flues. Well, if she looks on the proposal, there are no flues. I'm not proposing to put any flues there. And if I wanted flues, then of course I've got to come back and apply for planning permission. There are so many things that have been put in terms of conditions, which
Mr.
I feel.
Attenborough, sorry, that's 1 minute remaining.
Okay, which I feel are well over the top. But if that's what it's got to be, that's what it's got to be. I think, as far as I'm concerned, I'm getting to a point here where after 12 applications, nobody's actually saying what they actually want to see. They keep saying everything I propose is no good. If you make an objection about something, I go away and I do something about it. And then when I come back, you're objecting about something else. This is never going to be resolved. So I'm hoping that the committee see the struggles that I'm having, and in fact, vote to allow me to go ahead with this proposal. Otherwise, this property is going to sit empty again, and we'll be back to square one. I can't actually do any works on this property until I get planning permission because of the fact that it's in a conservation area.
All right, Mr. Assenbang, that's time. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming along to address committee this evening. If you want to do the same and put your microphone on mute and pop your camera off for me, that'd be great.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, if I can invite forward Councillor Culhane to address committee this evening. Councillor, thank you for coming along this evening. You have a limited time in which to address committee, but as ever, your brevity is appreciated. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
All right. Thanks very much, Chair. And firstly, can I give the apologies of Andy Slaughter MP? He wanted to speak in objection of the application tonight, but is unable to make it. This is the fourth time I'm speaking on 32A Verica Road now, so I apologise if I'm repeating myself at all. But I'd like to reiterate my pleasure that this property has been brought forward for planning consent. It's situated in a wonderful area, and it has been vacant for a very long time. And there's no doubt that the property should be brought back into residential use. However, this unique property is in the Barons Court Conservation Area, and any plans to bring it back into use need to make sure that it fits in with the surrounding area. The reason that David, Diana, and I are speaking tonight is because we think that these plans do not do that. We are 4 years, 16 sets of drawings, and 4 planning committees into the future of 32A Verica Road. The studio is only 33 square metres, so bringing it back into use is challenging, but even more so when there are no traces of architects, surveyors, or expert engineers in the plans. The application before you might seem familiar. That is because you rejected a similar 2-storey application last September due to poor living conditions, substandard sunlight and daylight in the basement, and a lack of ventilation. The question before us now is whether this application is better to live in than the one you refused, and I do not believe that it is.
Sorry, Councillor, sorry to interrupt you there. Mr. Assenbang, really sorry. Can I just ask you to switch your camera off for us? Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor, please continue.
No worries, thank you. It's frustrating that the set of drawings for this application are again littered with numerical disparities. Unfortunately, there's form here, as the same developer has needed retrospective planning to rectify similar disparities in 2 other properties on Emlyn Road and Adelaide Grove. The Planning Inspectorate, which has refused 5 appeals on this property, has noted what a precious asset Previously owned by artist Henry Jamin Brooks, this building is when upholding your previous refusal decisions. Yet here we are tonight, worried about the plans which threaten its artistic heritage. The Fulham Society have also raised several objections. These were about the retention of the original design of the roof, the large studio window, and the decorative brickwork on the facade of the building. These are of great importance to the enhancement of the conservation area, being both interesting and of historical and architectural importance in their own right. The worsening condition of the front of the building should not be factored into your decision-making, as Historic England guidance advises against this in the case of deliberate neglect, which I believe is the case here. This does not help that the detailed brickwork, which you saw in the presentation, is not documented in any of the plans. There's not even a survey for 32 Verica Road, which this property backs onto. A commission survey is mentioned, but we can't find it. Because it's in a conservation area, it's important that features are retained, that the front walls don't change shape, the building's roof isn't altered, and that the detailing will not be lost. Residents still have concerns about how the excavated building will be constructed and how high it will end up. The residents I'm representing are very skeptical of blinds being able to shut out emitting light, especially when windows are open. They are worried about damage, smells, noise, ducts so close to their home. Most of all, they are worried that only lip service has been paid to a construction method statement. It describes the studio as in sound condition structurally, and that the proposed works pose no significant threat to the structural stability of the property or adjoining properties. You only have to walk past it to see that this is not the case. This is why, to reassure residents, local plan DC11 requires an engineer's report as part of the planning application. This is missing, and without it, we feel everyone's time is being wasted. The report should be before us all now, and it is not. I'm not going to repeat all of the points made by David and Diana, but I would like to emphasize the sub-basement housing, which more resembles a dungeon. The kitchen has no light or air, no windows, no doors, and no access to any bin store. The only natural light is from a glass ceiling and sitting room, and it's previously been raised by members of this committee that this could easily be blocked by carpets or furniture. The most recent planning inspector was not satisfied with light levels. As per the local plan, a basement is a level below the pavement. This application seeks to have 2 levels of basement and a modified roof with new windows, but with no indication of the infrastructure needed to be put in to support it. Considering the scale of the work needed in the proposed plans, I'm disappointed that they do not appear to be more thorough and indeed inclusive to all residents. As these plans now only propose 2 floors, this property could be designed to be more inclusive and less risky to the buildings next door, and without the excessive basement excavation. Indeed, this could be achieved by retaining the roof as is. The most recent planning inspector also had the same idea. We really aren't interested in blocking every application that comes forward for this property just for the sake of it. We're not living in the past, and I think we're all in agreement that this property should be brought back into residential use. What we need is a professional set of plans with engineering reports. An architect has commented on the floor levels proposed in this refurbishment, saying that they're very curious. While the basement kitchen dining area has a minimal height of 1.2 meters, the open living area has a floor to ceiling height of 4.5 meters. In order to construct the basement, the ground would need to be excavated 1.6 meters from its present level shown on the plans. The only conclusion which can be drawn from this is that the applicant is trying to introduce another minimum floor height in the void above the open living area, which is not shown on the revised application, but which was shown on the first set of plans. The drawings are so muddled it's not possible to tell what will be built. An intention to demolish cannot be proven at this stage, but the deliberate confusion in the drawings, I think, provides strong evidence. But I hope we can all be in agreement that we want this building to be brought back safely into the Barons Court community as something beautiful and unique, and that this borough can be proud of. If this application is approved, this gives the green light to minor modifications to achieve what was wanted all along. Andy Slaughter MP spotted this too, and he said in his objection that residents are concerned an additional floor could be added at later stages of the planning process, creating the 3-story property that has been rejected on numerous occasions by this committee. There are strong planning policies that need to be complied with. David explained how the London Plan D3 and NPPF 127 and the local plan DC11, just to name a few. There's so much wrong with this application that the question really has to be, what's right about it? My fellow ward councillors, Councillor Darryl Brown and Councillor Zahra Qayyum and I, along with many objectors, including Andy Slaughter MP and the Fulham Society, politely ask you to reject this application for some of the following reasons, including poor living accommodation, which is just as bad as the last one you rejected, conservation issues, and the fact that it's unneighbourly, with a high risk of damage, noise, light, and smell nuisance. If you don't feel that you have enough information at this point to approve the scheme, you could choose to defer it until sufficient detail is provided or until you visit the site. This is meant to be a full planning application, and the answers you need should be before you now in the plans, not in the conditions. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. All right, I can now turn to members' questions on this application. So are there any members who would like to kick us off with a question about this application that we have before us? Councillor Carmel, I can see your hand up there. Please go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, Councillor.
My apologies. I thought I'd click the button and I just missed. And my apologies to the committee for that. If you will allow me just a tad of leeway, Chair, I just wanted to thank both the objectors and the applicant for the far more measured presentations that they gave this evening, and it makes it far clearer to the committee, or at least to me, the points that they wish to raise. And you know, this was far clearer than I think I think there have been not all of which have been to committee. I think 17 applications on this site. But one question, a very quick question I wanted to ask was a statement made by Mr. Assenbong during his perfectly reasonable presentation to committee, was that the property had been used as a residential property for 50 years. Now, I seem to remember reading in the planning history that there was a recent application, or relatively recent compared to the last 50 years, for it to be considered a residential property. Was it a truthful statement that this has been a residential property for 50 years?
Tom, can you take that one for us?
Yeah. So there was an application in 2017, which was for a lawful development certificate, which was to confirm that the use of the building as a residential unit was lawful. I don't know if that means it was if it was used that way for 50 years, but what it confirmed at that point was that it had been used as a residential dwelling for a sufficient period of time to become lawful. So it wasn't that it became a residential dwelling on that date in 2017. It's confirming that before that time it had been used for such a period of time that it was lawful as a residential unit. Whether that's 50 years, I don't know, but it's been determined that it is lawful as a residential dwelling. Hope that answers your question.
Well, not quite. And with the chair's permission, I will just pursue this for just a little while. There were a number of applications for certificate of lawful usefulness as a residential building that were refused by the local authority because there was insufficient evidence. The reading of the documents as I have done says that there was a limited evidence procedure that showed that council tax or poll tax or whatever tax or rates or whatever there was had been paid for the requisite period for a certificate of lawful use. But my reading of the heritage statement says that this was an artist studio for the latter part of the 20th century. And again, I put it to you, the statement that this has been a residential property for 50 years that was put forward by the applicant, is that a truthful statement?
I think through the chair, I don't think we could confirm or deny Councillor Carmel the duration that it's been in use as a dwelling house. I think the more relevant point for us is that it absolutely is its authorised uses as a residential dwelling, which was granted in November 2017. So that's the kind of material consideration for us. It would have very little bearing on our assessment of this application, whether it had been for 50 years or less. The important point is that it's established lawful uses as a residential dwelling.
Mr. Butler, as ever, I'm grateful for your sage and erudite advice that you have given on this matter. But the fundamental question is that we hear representations both for and against. And we as a committee who have to judge the representations that we have before us have to assess how much weight we give to each individual person who presents.
Councillor Carmel, if I can interrupt, I think you've had your answer there.
No, I promise you, if you give me about 20 seconds, there'll be a relevant question, and I crave your indulgence.
I mean, okay.
Is it not reasonable for us to give weight to the accuracy of representations made to us during the presentation, so we can accurately judge their contributions?
What's the question?
I'll be blunter than I thought I was going to be. I thought I'd made it quite clear. If the committee were to believe that a person making a representation to the committee, either for or against, had told an untruth, knowing it to be untruth, is that a material consideration for this committee?
I think the answer is that there is a certificate of lawfulness for this property, whether it's been 3 years, 10 years or 50 years, doesn't have any bearing on committee's decision. Matt, would that be a fair summary?
Through the chair, yes, I agree. I think that's certainly the relevant material consideration for us, is what its lawful use is, and I wouldn't begin to advise committee members what weight they should give to various contributors during committee. I think that's very much for the individual committee members to decide what weight and credence, if you like, to give to the representations made by third parties.
Do you want to move on, Councillor Carmel? Councillor Carmel, do you want to move on?
Can I just make a clarifying statement? I'll be very brief. I'm immensely grateful to Mr. Butler for his clarifying statement. And I would just like to state for the record that I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the lawful use of the property is as residential. My concern is as to the statements of Mr. Assenbang and the amount of credibility that can be can be placed on them, because on my personal basis, I do not believe that it has been in residential use for 50 years, given that the multiple applications for certificate of lawful use for the properties had been turned down on numerous occasions by the local authority.
Okay. Do you want to move on to a new question, Councillor?
I'm quite happy to let somebody else have a go. I've got a long
Councillor
list.
Harcourt.
Thank you, Chair. I want to begin with the issue of the number of applications that there have been for this, and a number of them have, as many of us here will recall, have come to this committee. In fact, I think Councillor Culhane says he's spoken about 4 times on this one, but we know there's 12 applications. And my point really is, and one of the, I think it was Mr. Warman, suggested that this is just the same application yet again. Now, what I need to know is, given that there's 12 applications with varying bits and pieces, is this a question of mix and match till eventually we are worn down and give planning permission or not? Or should we be in a situation where we say there is sufficient similarity, if not to the previous application, but to one of the previous applications in this sort of mix and match type of situation where elements of different applications are still present and others are not, etc., etc. And therefore, should we be saying that, I believe it's section 70A, that we shouldn't be determining it? I would appreciate officers' opinion on that before we proceed to the actual merits of this particular application.
Tom, can you take that one for us?
Yeah, so I direct you to paragraphs 1.25 and 1.26 within the committee report, which does talk about this very particular issue. So that goes through section 70A and what that means. And at the end of that, in paragraph 1.26, we're satisfied that the current scheme is materially different from the previous refusals due to the alterations that have been made that mean, yeah, there's something material there that now needs to be considered. That with something like this, that given the small size of the site, there's always going to be some similarities between schemes because you're dealing with a very small unit and there's only ever going to be so much that someone can do there. So I don't think you're ever going to completely move away from some elements that may have been on previous schemes. But ultimately, this one, whilst it may have some elements that you could find in other schemes, there are differences there. And we think it's appropriate to assess those differences to determine whether or not it's acceptable now.
Okay, thanks for that. Just to clarify then, can you state definitely that there are aspects of this scheme that were not included in any of the previous 12? And if so, which?
Yes, so from my understanding, there have been schemes before where where the accommodation has been over 2 floors, and I think I showed one of them in the presentation, but there hasn't been a scheme where that is also integrated with no changes to the roof in terms of increase in roof height and those sort of elements. So yes, this is a scheme that you haven't seen before.
Okay, so none of the others included no change to the roof height, is that correct?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. I do have other questions, but I'll come back to those to give somebody else a chance, as indeed Councillor Carmel did.
Thank you, Councillor Harcourt. Councillor Ahern, can I come to you next?
What are we going to demute? And you try something. Can we go back to the map or the plan showing the lower or the basement dining room and the kitchen? Is that possible?
Tom, we'll just give you a minute to share your screen for us.
Sorry, could you just say which one you wanted to look at?
Yeah, I want to say the kitchen and the dining room in the basement.
So the floor plan.
Yeah, the kind of cross section, I think.
Okay. That floor plan or the section drawing?
I think that the section drawing, I think, yeah.
This one.
Yeah. Right. So it's proposed to have a kitchen and dining area in the basement. And this confirmed there's no window, so you can't look out. There's no fresh air and a minimum of light. Have I got that right? Of natural light.
There's no window down there. It's at basement level. I think during the presentation, and I think you have seen this on a previous scheme. Sorry, I'm just trying to move along. But the light, and I know this was mentioned in representation, but the light comes through the structural glass floor. So from the lower ground floor level into the kitchen dining area at basement level.
So when it's furnished with settees and carpets and that, there'll be even less light going down than there is when it's empty. Is that not the case? Has any measurement been done, or is it no? It probably isn't possible to do a measurement of light down there, is it? I think that's the one I'm shipwrecking on.
So just in answer to your query about, once it's furnished and whether or not there'll be chairs or carpets on there, that would obviously be a choice of the occupier. So they would choose whether or not they wanted to have the light coming through the structural glass into their basement level. So it's very much a choice of the occupier, like I say. So most occupiers, you would expect, probably wouldn't make that choice, and they'd probably want to keep the glass area clear. But ultimately, if they don't, that's very much then their decision. But there's room within that area to put carpets or rugs or settees elsewhere in that room. So I think, yeah, I understand.
What do you mean elsewhere in the room?
Well, within the rest of the room, you could choose not to furnish that particular area if you wish to do so. So I'm not saying someone wouldn't do that. I'm just saying it would be a choice for whoever lived there. That's all. So I understand your concern. I'm just saying that would be a choice of the occupier.
See, I have to be quite clear. I can't possibly support an application where and I know the 7.6 has changed. It's got to be what they call it, comfortable living, but I don't see it as comfortable living if you're stuck down in a cellar, with basically what a basement is. A basement is only a nice word for a cellar, isn't it? With little natural light, and you're supposed to cook and have a dining room down there. So that's all my questions, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, it may help if through the chair you could just go back to the cross-section plan again, because I think Councillor Hearn is picked up on a kind of key issue here, which I think Councillor Hearn himself was probably the key issue for him in this, because we are mindful of this. We are mindful that this is a kitchen diner at a basement level. Now, it's not a double basement because the height difference is 3 point something. Sorry, I haven't got the figure in front of me, but it's not a double height basement, which you expect would be around about sort of 5-6 meters. And this is significantly less than this. So it's not double basement, but that said, it's still a kitchen diner at a basement level. Now, we've had to assess against the development plan policy. Now, since the last appeal decision, where the inspector felt that this didn't meet policy in respect of 7.6. And that policy has now fallen away and has been replaced by D3. Now, this, in our view, this policy is about optimizing. Indeed, the policy itself is entitled optimizing site capacity through the design-led approach. So it's a strategic policy for the whole of London and seeking to optimize sites, basically, in terms of use, but it has to be done appropriately. So we've given a lot of weight to the fact that this kitchen diner room would not be, it would be a largely functional residential use. It would be a place where people are actually carrying out stuff. So it could be lit artificially. There are ways of ducting and so forth to take away odours and what have you. So it'd be very much be functional rooms where you're cooking and eating. It then frees up more space at the higher levels where you've got roof lights and the obviously light from the street level for the open plan area to be far more comfortable and provide a higher standard of living accommodation space for a prospective occupier. So we've given a lot of weight to that fact. Otherwise, to not allow this would force all the accommodation at that upper level, and what we feel would create a more uncomfortable and less quality residential space. Furthermore, we're also mindful of the fact that the previous inspector gave weight to the fact that there was a mezzanine floor, and this would be providing accommodation over 3 levels and therefore more intensive use of the unit. Now that's been removed since the appeal decision on this current application, and it's now over 2 levels with the main dwelling area and living space at that upper level where obviously it's going to achieve natural light. So we do appreciate Councillor Hearn's point, and we've given a lot of thought and consideration to that in the assessment of this application. But we feel that this does improve and certainly make it more comfortable, which ultimately is what we need to assess it against in terms of the relevant policy.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Councillor Hearn, did you
can I
have
come back on that, Chair? Say
yes,
all
yes,
these things is a matter of interpretation, and I disagree that this actually makes it a comfortable, decent living accommodation for people. As I say, a basement is just a nice word to say a cellar, and you've got a kitchen and a dining room and a cellar, and I don't think it's acceptable in the 21st century.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Okay, Tom, did you want to stop your screen share, and I'll come back to any other members. Councillor Carmel, I can see your hand.
Right, just unmuting. I have a great deal of sympathy with Councillor Hearn's statements. He and I have been on this planning committee for probably more years than we care to remember. But one thing that we have been in complete agreement over the years is our opposition to hobbit holes, as I think Councillor Ahern christened them on a site up in Ravenscourt Park. This is not a development, despite the attempts by the applicant to try and make it acceptable. Can we go back to the plan that Councillor Hearn called for of the lower ground floor that he requested? Because I think there was an important point about light that Councillor Hearn made.
Tom, are you able to share your screen with us again? Thank you. Was it this image?
Not that one. The one showing. So yes, that one is lovely. So looking at the right hand proposal, there is, in my estimation, about a 7 or possibly 8% rectangle that says structural glass floor above for natural light. Is that the total of natural light that is proposed to the basement, notwithstanding any furniture, carpets, rugs, or lamps, or whatever else that is proposed for the basement? Is that the sum total of natural light that is proposed?
Yes.
Tom,
So,
yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
apologies, Chair. Yeah, there's no windows down there because of the level that it's at. So the only light coming down to that area will be via the lower ground floor through that structural glass. And I guess, you know, potentially there might be some down the staircase as well, but primarily we're talking about the structural glass here, which is obviously served by the windows in the front elevation and the 8 roof lights in the roof, which would, so that provides the light to the lower ground floor, and then you have the structural glass providing, you know, the light then further down into the basement level.
I'm grateful to you for that answer. We might move on to the lights later on, but would you say that my estimation of the floor space of about 8 or 9% was about correct?
I don't know the exact percentage. It's difficult without going away.
I'm saying about correct. I'm not going to hold you to it, but just looking at the floor plan that you have in front of you, would you say that, call it 10%? Would you say about 10%?
Could be 10, could be a bit more. It's very difficult.
Okay, 12%. Would you be happy with 12%?
But if we're talking about approximations and then we're moving things up and down by a percentage, we're probably being quite specific. So I'd only feel comfortable saying something like that if I could actually go away and measure it. I accept what you're saying. You're saying it's a small proportion of the floor area. So I understand that, but I can't say a percentage for you. Sorry.
Okay. Well, yes, I with your permission, Chair, I withdraw the previous question, as I accept that it's potentially unfair to put the officers on the spot, even to attempt to approximate the potential luminescence levels of the basement.
Would you like to ask another question instead?
Yes. Would the officer like to comment, given the limited nature of the potential areas that could illuminate the areas at the basement area, would he care to comment on whether he believes that this, to quote Councillor Ahern, and I've always liked this phrase, this hobbit hole will be adequately lit throughout, naturally lit throughout even?
I think we need to be looking here at the overall standard of amenity that's provided in the context of the existing unit that is on that site. So there's a unit there which already has lower ground floor level with a mezzanine above that could potentially, you know, restrict some of the light down to the lower ground floor level or make it slightly more dingy there. That is being removed. We now have a lower ground floor level at a relatively similar height to the pre-existing situation, which will be served by more windows than the pre-existing situation. And then, yes, I accept at basement level, the only natural light source is the structural glass. But overall, we feel that the standard of amenity provided for this unit does comply with the policy set out in the London plan, and therefore it would provide a suitable level of amenity. And that's all set out in the committee report. So yeah, I'm essentially just reiterating that point.
Mr. Scriven, I'm immensely grateful for that answer. And should you ever wish to cease being an officer and to become a politician, you have shown a remarkable aptitude for giving a political answer to a direct question. If I could move on, we had, sorry, I've got to look at my notes here now, because Mr. Scriven, with his wonderful last answer, has in fact, like, can I pass while I find what my next question was?
Councillor Harcourt, I think you wanted to come back to us.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I do want to come back. We're looking at this whole idea of basement and the light and so on. And there was one of the drawings you had side by side, which showed the current application section through alongside the previous one with the mezzanine. Is that the one? There was one, I think it was just the two, but that.
Sorry, is that the one you were looking
I think was there one previously which just showed the two side by side?
So do you mean the existing and proposed? Is that, yeah. They're not side by side, but they're one slide apart. So if you want,
no. This will do. Okay. Because what I'm interested in is this situation about the basement and the current lower ground floor. And it looks very much from that drawing that I saw, which this isn't the one that I could see, that literally somebody, I mean, it's obviously not done that way, but it was effectively like just rubbed out the mezzanine, leaving the lower ground floor and this basement. And I think, Mr. Scriven, you alluded to the fact that, or somebody did, that the basement height was 1.2 meters and the height of the ceiling from the lower ground floor is something like 4.6 meters. And I just question, why would somebody want to spend additional money digging out a basement and leaving that massive great height higher up, rather than leaving things effectively as they are, unless they have plans in the future for introducing a mezzanine? Did the applicant ever give you the rationale behind why this is the case?
I don't know the exact rationale behind why they chose to do this. I mean, obviously, part of this is that they're trying to respond to the previous refusals and the previous dismissed appeal, where one of the main things the inspectors have raised is that having 3 floors, including a mezzanine, it creates an intensity of use and also probably blocks light down to the lower levels, which then means it's unacceptable. So whilst I can't speak for the applicant, I would assume they were responding to that in trying to find a way to, maximise the floor space within the site to provide the best unit they can, but while still making it acceptable in planning terms. So I assume that's the route they've been trying to go down, but obviously I can't speak for them. The only other aspect to that is that if you look in the officer report at the suggested conditions, one of them is to do with there's a condition there which says they can't put in a mezzanine. So I know there were some concerns raised during the objector speaker statements, where they were concerned that they'd taken the mezzanine out and they're just going to get permission for this potentially and put a mezzanine straight back in. But we have put a condition in to ensure that cannot happen. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I'm sorry to say it doesn't really, because what I was asking about is, it seems odd, shall we say, I think somebody used the term curious, floor layout. Why on earth you would spend the money and the time and bother digging out a basement to a further, God knows what it is, another meter and a bit, 1.6 meters or something, when in fact, you've got a basement there already, and and if you kept the lower ground floor where it is, everything would be easier. But it's still the 2 floors. There's no loss of potential loss of floor space. Now, the point about the condition doesn't say in perpetuity you can never build a mezzanine floor. It says that it would mean it would require planning permission. So, it's the usual story of creeping planning permission. You get permission for one thing, implement it, come back, and because there's already been changes made, then the next one becomes more acceptable, and so on. So I have concerns about that and the rationale for the reasoning of digging out the basement and keeping 2 floors. And as I say, if you'd looked at that other plan section where there's the 2 side by side, it becomes much more obvious.
I think Tom probably can't speculate on the reason for this layout, but Councillor, you've made your own inferences, and I think that's fair enough. But I don't think officers can necessarily speculate on why the applicant's chosen to lay out this way, other than to respond to previous refusals. Would that be fair to say, Tom?
Yeah, sorry, if I could jump in through the chair. Yeah, I mean, it's very much a case when an application is submitted to us, unless we consider it unacceptable and not in compliance with the development plan, then we won't seek to interrogate the rationale behind it. We just have to, it's everyone's right to submit an application as to what they want to do with their property, and then it's for us to assess against the development plan. So we wouldn't be in a situation, unless we felt it was unacceptable, then we may seek to understand more, that they then change our position. But in this instance, we considered it in compliance with policy. And there may be a rationale in relation to usable floor space it provides, it presents, because I think the mezzanine, or the existing situation, or what it was previously before recent times, the floor space is probably less than what it would be with this proposal. So I think in terms of square footage, it provides more space. And I think the important point for us was it's very much functional space at that basement level, which then frees up what could be quite a high quality bit of space above the basement, which would obviously have a great deal of natural light coming through and allow quite an expansive area of space, because it's not a very large footprint, obviously, this unit. So there may have been a desire to create that kind of very high floor to ceiling height in what could be a very then, open and high quality bit of living area above. So by removing the mezzanine, it enables that to be created. And then just very quickly on Councillor Harcourt's other point, we couldn't refuse a scheme or seek to object to it in relation to preempting what an applicant may do in the future. We have to assess a scheme on its merits as presented to us. And as Tom explained earlier, we have stuck a condition on this. So any works creating a mezzanine would be liable to enforce an action
without planning permission.
Yeah, I mean, if they subsequently come forward with, we can't predetermine any future application. If they came forward with an application for a mezzanine floor, then obviously that would be something we'd need to assess against the development plan policies and any other material considerations, which would include neighbours' comments and consultee responses.
Okay, thank you. Just to be clear, I wasn't asking officers to speculate. I was asking whether that rationale behind this had been explained by the applicant. Clearly not.
Okay.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. I've got other areas that I want to look at in a minute.
Okay, Councillor Carmel, I can see your hand.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm keen not to make this a Councillor Harcourt, Councillor Carmel show, but primarily, one question I genuinely want an answer to is that reference has been made in the objections to this plan to potential breaches of London Plan Policy 7.6, and I wondered if officers could give me their views on whether there is a marginal or major or possible breach of London Plan Policy 7.6.
Can you take that one for us?
Yeah. So policy 7.6 was in the 2016 London plan, which has now been superseded by the 2021 version. So that policy no longer exists, but it was replaced by policy D3 within the new plan. And I think as Matt may have mentioned it earlier, but I think I did say it in my presentation that now talks about providing a comfortable standard of living for existing and future occupiers. So that's what we're looking at. And, you know, to some extent that's a matter of judgment and for the decision maker. But obviously, from our point of view, within the report, we've set out why we think that it does provide that, and it does provide a suitable standard of amenity.
With your permission, Chair, this is probably the most intractable planning application that has been before us since the one on Comera Road in 1986, that it has had more applications before us than any other subsequent applications. And I'm fully cognizant of Councillor Harcourt's reference to section 7.
Councillor, just for a second. I suppose we have seen applications for this site before, but I don't necessarily if that has a bearing on the application we're looking at now. So do you want to get to your question?
If you give me 20 seconds, I will explain the bearing that I'm coming to, which was Councillor Harcourt's reference to section 70, subsection A, subsection 8 of the Town and Country Planning Act, which is the ability of a local authority to decline to determine an application should the committee consider that it is similar to a application which they have previously refused. Now, give or take some minor tinkering with the roof lines and the basement levels and this and that and the other, we have refused this application on numerous occasions.
Can I stop you there just a second? We haven't refused this application before. We've refused other applications on this site before.
You are quite correct, of course, Chair.
Officers have already explained to us why they think it's materially different, but we can ask officers to repeat that.
We as a committee are entitled and indeed have a duty to determine amongst ourselves, because we are the decision makers, and I fully understand how frustrating it is for officers with their professional determination as to why they consider something is different. But as a committee member of long standing, I feel that this is sufficiently similar to applications that we have previously refused for us as a committee to invoke section 70, subsection A, subsection 8, and apologies if I've got the relevant section wrong, for us to determine that we should decline to determine this application. And for the sake of the committee, the effect of us making that determination just means that the applicant is not able to appeal to the planning inspectorate. It means that is that, and the neighbours and the objectors have been through years and years of hell of multiple applications, and members of this committee will of long standing.
If I can just stop you there for a moment, I'm going to come back to the point that you're making. I'm
proposing that, by the way.
I know. So I'm going to come back to that, but if I can just ask Tom to explain for committee again why officers feel that this application is materially different, so we can hear that, so that members can hear that again. But I am going to come back to the proposal you're making.
Okay, so I just have to direct you to those paragraphs again in the officer report 1.25 and 1.26, where we do talk about that section of the Town and Country Planning Act and declining to determine applications. And it explains the whole logic behind that process and how it should be used. In terms of why we consider it to be materially different is because we haven't had a application before where we've had a roof that essentially remains as existing but is replaced with this number of roof lights, and where accommodation is only provided over 2 floors rather than over 3 floors. So it's the first time we have had the application in that form. I understand that some of those elements have been seen before, but we consider overall there's a material difference that should be considered. Yeah, I think that's probably all I can say on it at this point.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So it's officers, bear with me, Councillor Carmel.
Yes,
it's officers' view that this application is materially different from other applications that committee has seen and that officers have determined as well. Is that what you're saying, Tom?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Chair, it might help if I just also reference the fact that what's compounded this, in officers' view at least, is the appeal decision that the applicant has received on the previous proposals, because we had a scenario where the applicant, in our view, is genuinely sought to address the concerns of the planning inspectorate by addressing, in particular, external alterations. And when he then submitted a new scheme which had addressed those, but the council refused on standard of accommodation, i.e. the most recent, when that went to appeal, the appeal inspectorate on this occasion, while he now felt the physical alterations had been addressed, actually felt it provided substandard accommodation, whereas previous inspectors hadn't. So I guess in defence of the applicant, we had a situation where the most recent appeal had now the different inspector had taken a different view on the whole than previous inspectors, and felt that they had issues with the standard of accommodation when previous inspectors hadn't. So I think that's kind of also complicated the process for the applicant, and so it's resulted again in another application. So we certainly feel they are materially different, and there's genuine attempts by the applicant to try and get a scheme through where they can bring this back into the lawful residential use.
Okay. So, Councillor Perez, Councillor
come back on that particular point, please.
Hang on. Bear with me. Can I just ask, Councillor Perez, is your question relating to this particular issue or another issue?
Well, the officer has kindly said that they feel that the applicant has genuinely attempted to address all the concerns by the inspectorate. Yes, my question is, do you also feel that the applicant has made an attempt to address all the concerns raised by the residents? And
okay, so that's slightly, ever so slightly different. So let's come back to that one, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Perez. Councillor Carmel, you would like to propose that we decline to determine this application.
And indeed, if I can make a short statement in support of that, I'm actually immensely grateful to Mr. Butler for his interjection, which, as far as I can see, entirely supports my application under Section 70. The planning inspector, the planning inspectors on numerous occasions have unanimously agreed that this application should be refused. This is immensely similar to an application that we have previously refused, and therefore it is an entirely proper and appropriate exercise of our powers under the Town and Country Planning Act to exercise our powers under Section 70 to decline to determine this. There has been appeal after appeal declined. There has been variations of planning applications also refused, and therefore I formally propose that we decline to determine under Section 70, whatever.
Okay, understood. You're going to need a seconder for that, which I'll come back to, which Councillor Thorley's raising his hand there, so he's happy to second that proposal. But I can see that other members have questions about this proposal, so I'm going to ask those members to ask those questions. If they are about this proposal, if they're about other issues, then can I ask that we come back to you? So Councillor Perez, you had a question about whether the applicant has sought to address the concerns of residents.
Yes, I wanted the officers' views on it, because they've said that the applicant has genuinely attempted to address the concerns raised by the inspector.
Okay.
So I wanted their opinion on that. Also, Councillor Carmel is alluding to appeal after appeal after appeal. So, and he's making reference to previous applications. And so I want some legal advice, please. How much weight do we have to give to the history of what's happened?
Okay, I think your question's ever so slightly different, because you're asking to what extent does this application overcome the previous reasons for objection, whereas that what we're looking at the moment is whether this application is materially different from previous applications that committee and the officers have seen. So we will come back to that question once we've dealt with the issue of whether committee wants to decline to determine. So we'll come back to you. And sorry if that seems like I'm splitting hairs. Councillor Harvey, did you have a question on this?
Hello, thank you. I've got two questions. I'd like to just understand what is the legal definition of materially different, so that I can ensure that I've got my head around that. And secondly, I'd really like to see the images again of the different applications, because I'm a visual person. So it would be really helpful for you to point out on those images, if you don't mind, please, Tom, the difference between last application and this application, because this is new to me. I've not sat on previous committees when this has come up. So it's quite frustrating when people refer back to previous stuff they've looked at, which I haven't looked at. So I'd really like to have that, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
And if you don't mind just explaining just to go through it again, very briefly, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, yeah. So on the left-hand side, you've got the last application that was refused by Planning Committee, which was in September last year. That had accommodation over 2 levels, but it had changes to the roof. So there was an increase in the flat roof height to align with there's a small ridge at the front elevation on Fairholme Road. So to align with that. You've then got the appeal decision from November 2020. So in relation to this scheme, where again, you had an increase in the flat roof height to align with the small pitched roof at the front, but you also had accommodation set over 3 floors. You've now got a scheme where there is no change to the roof other than it will be replaced and they will be putting in roof lights, but there's no change in terms of the scale of the roof. So you've got a couple of differences there in terms of the number of roof lights proposed and also the scale of the roof, but the residential accommodation is set over 2 floors. So,
right.
So
just looking at the image on the left, right, taking one out in the middle for the moment, and the one on the left and on the right, the difference is the roof.
Yes, that's the
not being raised. That's the only difference.
That's the material difference between those.
Sorry, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
I was just saying, yes, that is the key material difference between those schemes.
So legally, does that fit the definition of what a material difference is?
I would say it's a matter of judgment as to what is material, but there is a difference there in terms of design and scale, and therefore it's materially different there's a material difference between those two things. You look at both of them, they are different.
Yeah, but
sorry to interrupt. Poonam, are you able to give us any guidance on whether that difference is a material difference in legal terms? Are you able to give us any direction there?
I think it's really a question of planning judgment. There's no actual statutory definition that I'm aware of that defines what material amendments are. It really is about looking at it in a planning judgment, making an assessment whether it's significant. But yeah, it really is. I can't say any better than how Tom has described it to you.
Poonam, is there any case law relating to it?
There probably is, but I couldn't tell you on the top of my head right now as to anything that may help in actual specific guidance to that.
I could say through the chair that it was relevant to us as planning officers that we certainly felt this was a significant material difference given the scale and nature of what was before us and the context in terms of, this was a small residential dwelling. If you were looking at this height change on a much larger scheme, then we may have taken a different view, but given that this is a relatively small dwelling unit, a change of this nature within that context we felt was significantly material. We were also mindful that this was in a conservation area, and indeed previous refusals and indeed subsequent appeal decisions had picked up on the sensitivity of alterations to the roof. And we saw this as an attempt to overcome the previous concerns about the alterations and enlargement to the roof by actually maintaining it largely as existing. So it wasn't even marginal. We saw this as a significant material difference between the applications.
Councillor, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it would be helpful to have more certainty on, because to me it doesn't really look like I don't believe, or I don't feel that it's a significant difference, which is why it would be helpful to have a bit more clarity on what the law is around that. But I guess I have to go with what I can see and what I've heard.
Yeah, I think what the direction that Poonam's giving us here, Poonam, would it be fair to say is that it's a matter of it's a planning judgment. There's nothing specified in law that says what is and isn't a material difference.
Yeah, you're essentially looking at what is before you and what is being proposed, and in relation to that, how significant is that change? So statutory definition it is a matter of planning judgment.
Okay, and Tom, would it be fair to say it's the judgment of officers that this application is materially different from previous ones that we have seen and that officers have seen?
Yes, that's right. And I think what Matt said was very pertinent, that what is material will differ across different schemes depending on their scale. And here, as he was pointing out, we've got quite a small scale building, so changing the roof in this way would be a material difference. So there is a material change there between the two schemes. But yeah, it's a matter of judgment, but definitely our view is that it is material, and therefore we've gone down the route of determining, well, assessing the application and bringing it before committee to determine.
Okay. Councillor, I know you were looking for more certainty. I don't think there is more certainty there, but did you have any other questions on this specifically?
Not on this particular point. No.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sadiq, I think you had a question relating to this.
Thank you, Chair. I understand from the officer's recommendation there is material there is a material difference and significant difference in this application as compared to previous applications. But if the officers can sum up or read, I understand this application was exactly in front of the court, High Court. Is there any directions from the High Court, specific directions made for the committee or for the council? Is there?
Yeah, so can officers explain what happened with this application when it was previously determined by officers?
Sorry, it was in front of the court, and is there directions by the High Court?
Yeah.
Exactly the same application was, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
I think so. Within the presentation, my summary is that this application came before the council before. It was determined. There was an error on the decision notice. It was judicially reviewed, went to the High Court. The decision was quashed on the basis of that sort of technical error on the decision notice. As far as I understand, they weren't looking at any of the planning merits, and they weren't looking to direct us in any way in terms of determining the application. But I might just defer to the legal officer just in case there's anything further on that. But that is my understanding of the situation.
If I can add, is there any directions from the court for the committee to determine this application?
Through the chair, if that's okay. The only reason why it was judicially reviewed was because the incorrect plans had been referred to in the planning decision notice, and in order to amend that, the council had to agree to concede to judgment that the incorrect plans had been referred to, and that's why the decision was, it was agreed that the decision notice should be quashed. And in the directions itself, there was no actual directions from the court as to what the council needs to look at specifically in redetermining the matter. It was simply that the matter would be presented back to the council to determine, and that was it. There was no further direction, if that answers Councillor Siddiqui's point.
Thank you, Poonam. Yes, I got the answer.
Okay. Can I just make a suggestion? Councillor Carmel, I see your hand, but I'm not going to come to you yet. Can officers are just looking for, Councillor Harvey was looking for a bit more clarity there on material differences. Councillors are just looking at that for us, looking for some research on that for us. So I'm going to ask that we take a 5-minute break in the live stream. So if I can ask officers to put a pause on the live stream, and then I'll be asking all members to put their microphones on mute while we take that 5-minute pause. So I'll just wait for that live stream to come off. Charles, is that the live stream paused, or am I still broadcasting? I can see the sign, but our members still broadcasting.
Yes, it remains live the entire time, Chair. It's just a question of the tile coming up.
Fine, we're all still live. So if I can just ask everyone to keep their microphones on mute, and we'll come back at 1:15 to go into this further. But if I can ask all members to keep their microphones on mute in the meantime. Okay, if I can ask all members to return and to switch their screens on for me, and then we'll be resuming in just a moment.
I'm trying to turn my screen on and I got a message saying you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Charles, can you disable that feature for us?
All right, I'll take it out. I still can't. Still getting the message saying.
No, I can see you, Colin. I can see you.
All right, it's come now.
So just so everyone's aware, we're still broadcasting, but if all members can come back, switch their screens back on, but pop themselves on mute for me. Okay, that's all of us back. Wonderful. All right, Charles, if I can ask you to remove that screen share. Great. Okay. So apologies, everyone, for that adjournment that was slightly longer than we hoped for. Councillor Harvey, you were asking for some more direction around material differences. I believe we have that now. Poonam, are you able to give us some commentary on that?
Yeah, so apologies for the time that it's taken us, but I just checked on whether there was anything that was potentially helpful to, in case law, to say what was a material consideration. I've got to say that I'm going to have to repeat what I said before the adjournment, that there's nothing more specific. It is a matter of the decision maker deciding on what is a material consideration. There's plenty of guidance on what is not a material consideration, such as, financial implications, etc., which I'm sure committee members are all familiar with. But it is a matter of planning judgment as to whether or not the change that is being considered before you today is material in the sense that it's substantially different or different enough to be considered material. So I'm sorry I can't help any further, but I thought I'd at least have a look. And I also thought I should take the opportunity to, I may have said something slightly misleading in respect of the quash decision. I do need to clarify that quash decision is no longer an actual decision because obviously it's now been quashed. So what is before you today is being looked at afresh. So there's no outstanding decision as such for the previous quash.
All right, thank you, Poonam. Councillor Harcourt, I believe you had a question that you thought was relevant to the matter at hand.
Yeah, thank you. We've been told by officers that the material difference is the roof height. So let's just look at that and see whether there is actually material difference in what is being suggested there. Now, Miss Jackson, I think it was, alluded to some issues around the roof and such like when she was speaking a little while ago. And members, I'm sure, will all have received the letter from her, which I think was earlier today, or was it yesterday? I can't remember. In which she says that the drawings are not accurate and they don't show the height of the parapet correctly, and that the roof as being designed with the roof lights as being shown in the drawings would be not possible to build without there being an increase in height. Indeed, in the report, it talks about the roof lights there being 0.05 meters above the current height. So, I think we need to look at this and to see just how big a difference this really is, and whether we've actually had the figures associated with the roof and the rebuild. Because what is being suggested is that there are no actual figures, and it's effectively, well, just a hand-drawn thing, and there's therefore nothing to actually to be able to go back onto should they not be built in accordance with the plan, because there is nothing in the plan to say how it should be built.
Okay, Tom, can you comment on that for us regarding the roof height and whether that's been specified?
Yes, so the drawings are to scale, and they do also have spot heights on various parts of them. So for example, when looking at the sections, the existing section shows a spot height for the parapet wall of 8.3 meters above ordnance datum. So that's not above the pavement level, that's above sea level ultimately. And then it shows the same height on the proposed section. So that's just an example where it's showing on the drawings that there is no change in the height, and we're satisfied that we have scale drawings before us which show what is there at the moment and what.
Sorry, Tom, it might be helpful if you can just show us the drawings.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
1 second. Okay. So just by way of it, yeah, so for example, on this particular drawings, you do have some spot heights there which are annotated, but the drawings are also to scale, so we can measure anything we need to measure. If it was to be granted permission and they were to build it, we would be able to, you know, work out whether or not they were building it in accordance with those plans. And again, yeah, there's a spot height here showing that there's no change in the height between the existing proposed ridge line. The same again on these sections. So this was the one I was looking at, for example, the parapet height, 8.3 meters above the ordnance datum, and it's the same on the proposed. So there are figures on various plans. There's not a figure for absolutely every dimension, but there's a scale that you can use on the drawings to then measure anything else you wish to measure. So, you know, we're satisfied that the drawings are sufficient to make an assessment, and they would be sufficient to enforce against in the future if it was to be built out in this way. Also, when inspectors have looked at this before, they've taken the same view. So I think that's probably all I can say on that.
Okay, there's eight roof lights. Have there been 8 roof lights before?
No. So yeah, there's the 8 roof lights here. I think the one, so if I just go back to the comparable schemes.
There've been so many, it's difficult to know
this one,
how many roof lights there've been in all of them.
Yeah, so on when they were raising the roof height up to match the ridge, I don't have the plan in front of me, but I believe this had 2 sort of probably larger but centrally located roof lights. And there, I believe there was going to be some glazing along this, you know, sort of similar to what's on the front elevation. So there was a different roof light arrangement anyway in the previous schemes compared to the current one, which does locate more roof lights across the flat roof when compared to previous schemes.
Okay, so the current configuration is again different to previous?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harcourt.
Just trying to clarify and, you know, make sure that we're absolutely clear. And if this adds anything in terms of that judgment call, which is what we're talking about,
yes,
that's the point I was trying to make. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Carmel.
Chair, I'm sorry to do this, but I have to formally ask you, during what was alleged to be a 5-minute adjournment, was there any discussion between members of the Labour administration and officers from which the opposition was excluded about this application?
Not about the application. I asked Poonam to let me know. I asked the legal officer to let me know when she was ready to come back. And I also,
I have to say, Chair, I'm really sorry to interrupt.
No, hang on. Let me finish. No, let me finish.
Unacceptable. It
hang
is
on. I'm speaking, Councillor Carmel.
Unreasonable.
No. I'm speaking. Bear with me. I asked Poonam to let me know when she was ready to come back. That's all we discussed. And Labour members asked me to let them know when they were ready than when we were ready to come back. So that's the only thing that was discussed. And then similarly, I extended the same courtesy to you and Councillor Thorley. I let you know when it was time for us to come back. And I'm sorry the adjournment lasted longer than we were anticipating. That was to give officers time to give us a legal view on this. So I'm sorry that the adjournment took slightly longer than we were hoping for, but we are back now and we're ready to take a vote on your proposal. So do you have any other questions that relate?
I'm sorry, Chair. I've given you fair chance to explain yourself. I will be recusing myself from this meeting. You had private discussions with officers, with the Labour group during an adjournment to which the opposition were not invited to, and unacceptable, and therefore I will be recusing myself from a vote on this meeting, because you and I know that this is supposed to be a quasi judicial committee, and how, quite frankly, dare you have discussions with the Labour group and with officers?
There was no discussion with the Labour group.
No, Councillor Carmel. Can someone please put Councillor Carmel's chosen to absent himself from this meeting.
Chair, I was putting my daughter to sleep. I don't want to be accused of what he's accused.
No, I know. I appreciate that. And apologies, Councillor Perez.
Every minute, Chair, there was no discussion within the Labour group during that adjournment.
Absolutely. So just for any members of the public who are watching, we took a brief adjournment so that officers could seek further legal clarity on the issue regarding material differences between applications. I asked officers to let me know when they were ready to resume. They did that, and Labour group members asked me to let them know when we were ready to resume as well, and I did that as well. There was no discussion in any private forum regarding the application during that time. So that's just for clarity for the minutes and for any members of the public watching as well. Now, Councillor Thorley, you're still with us. Can I get a verbal? You gave us a hand earlier, but we're looking for a verbal seconder.
I'm happy to second, yes. And thank you for your explanation a moment ago.
Yeah, apologies. And apologies again that adjournment took slightly longer than anticipated. Okay, so most of us are still here. Councillor Carmel's chosen to leave the meeting. Just bear with me. Can I get some clarity on if the proposer has left the meeting? Are we still able to, I mean, they have proposed and it has been seconded, but if the proposer has left the meeting, are we still able to take a vote on their proposal? Can I get any clarity on that? It's probably a slightly unusual situation, but it would be similar if someone had lost connection, for example, after they've made a proposal. Thanks, Poonam.
Yeah, I mean, unless Charles says anything any different, I believe the proposal still stands. It has been seconded. Okay. Even though Councillor Carmel has chosen to leave the meeting, it has been discussed by committee members openly by all. So it's still before determination.
Okay.
The proposal hasn't been withdrawn, so it still stands.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, in which case then, we're going to take a vote on Councillor Carmel's proposal to decline to determine this application. So I'm going to call on members in alphabetical order about whether they want to decline to determine that application. So just for the sake of clarity, if you say for, then you are for declining to determine, and therefore the application won't be determined at committee this evening. If you say against, then you are voting against the proposal to decline to determine and will continue with the rest of the application, and will at a later point we'll take an actual vote on the application that's in front of us. Does anyone have any questions on that? Or is everyone clear? Okay, good, thank you.
All Chair, right, so I do have one.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
I'm not being presumptuous of the decision one way or the other.
Yeah.
In the event that we decline to determine, where does that leave the status of this application? Does it fall, or can it just be brought back at a future date?
Yeah, that's Poonam. Can you take that one for us?
The result would be that there's no actual decision because you've declined to determine. So there's nothing before you as to whether or not it comes back as is a matter for the applicant, and whether it will be decided that it will be determined at his next attempt. But as the decision stands, there will be no decision other than that the committee have exercised their powers to decline to determine.
So apologies, Poonam, I have a further follow-up question then. Could the applicant then choose to bring the same application back again? Would they be able to do that?
There's nothing to prevent Mr. Essenbang making any future applications. That's a matter for him. We can't really stop him from doing that. Then it's a matter for us as a planning authority as to whether or not we decide that it's going to be determined or not.
Okay, it's up to officers about whether they put that forward to be determined if the same one came back.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. Does everyone else understand? Yes. Okay, good. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, and I've just had another view that, Poonam, is it correct? Could the applicant appeal against the non-determination?
Yes, he can appeal for non-determination against a non-determination.
All right, okay, that makes sense. Okay, if everyone's ready, then I'm going to put that proposal to a vote. So in which case, Councillor Ahern.
Against.
Councillor Harcourt.
Against.
Okay, Councillor Harvey.
Against.
Okay, Councillor Perez.
Against.
Councillor Siddiq.
Against.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
And I also vote against the application. Okay, so in which case then that means the proposal to decline to determine falls, and we carry on with the rest of the discussion of this item. So, Councillor Perez, apologies, you had a question earlier that I didn't come to, and it was regarding whether the applicant had overcome the reasons for refusal or the reasons for residents' concerns. Can you just repeat that question for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for my previous interjection. It's just that I didn't like the accusation made by Councillor Carmel. So
I understand.
Okay, my question to officers, please, is do they feel that the applicant has addressed all the concerns that the objectors have raised? And has there been an attempt to address this, please?
Tom, are you able to take that for us?
Yeah. Okay. So there's probably a couple of things here. Obviously, as we've been discussing, there's been various applications over time where residents have had concerns, and the committee have had concerns, and officers have had concerns. So throughout the changes that had been made, obviously the applicant has been seeking to resolve some of those concerns as we've moved forward through the various applications. I think in terms of officers, we've now put this forward with a recommendation to approve because we feel as though it has resolved the outstanding material planning issues. However, obviously, if you have a look at the objections that have been raised and the summary table within the officer report, it sets out that the neighbours do still have quite a number of concerns with the scheme. So I can't say that it's resolved all of the residents' concerns. However, I can say that the scheme has been through various iterations to try and remove issues and make the proposal better, and officers are now satisfied that we've got to that point. That's probably all I can say on it, though.
And thank you, Tom. And are there opportunities as well to have conversations with residents just to follow up on those concerns and to address any concerns that they have? And I mean, what communication channels are there as well, or there have been to try and address these?
Do you mean between the applicant and neighbours? Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a benefit to there being informal discussion between an applicant and neighbours or any other interested party outside of the planning process. You know, I don't know whether that has happened in this particular case. All I can look at is the planning history, what's been looked at before, the concerns that are currently raised, and where we've got to in terms of the amended scheme, and how much that has responded to the previous reasons for refusal. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Sorry, through the chair, I don't know if it would help Councillor Perez, because obviously there was a wide range of objections that have been raised by a number of residents, and these have been presented on each and every application by and large. If it helps Councillor Perez, I mean, the previous committee and the last refusal was solely on the grounds of substandard accommodation. So one would assume that, as well as officers, committee considered by and large all the other concerns have been addressed. That would certainly be the kind of conclusion that I would reach on that, if indeed the sole reason was on standard of accommodation. So we certainly feel that these concerns have been addressed, including the standard of accommodation, particularly in the context of what now has been a significant material change in the policy in relation to the new D3.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butler. Now, in relation to this point, because you have alluded to the London plan on numerous occasions, so how does this new application meet DE3, and in your view, does it create an acceptable quality of living environment for future occupiers? And how does it meet DE3, please?
Tom, did you want to address that? Or?
Yeah, I can come back on that. So it doesn't set out specific standards in relation to the sort of very minute details that we're looking at here, but we're looking at the overall standard of accommodation for this unit and whether it complies with policy D3 in terms of providing a comfortable living arrangement for the future occupiers. So we've looked at the windows they're providing, the sort of level of accommodation, the amount of people you're expected to have in there, and whether or not, as a result of all those factors, the overall level of accommodation is acceptable. I think the other thing to bear in mind with that is obviously the existing unit has a certain level of amenity, which maybe isn't as high as you might find in some other properties. So you need to bear that fallback position in mind when you're judging the current proposal. It's not like a brand new house where you might expect slightly different standards. This is a very particular site with a very particular level of existing amenity, and there needs to be a judgment made against that as to whether or not the current proposal provides a comfortable standard of accommodation in relation to that existing situation. And our view is that it does, given the amount of windows they proposed and the changes that they've made over time. So that is our position on it.
Thank you.
Councillor Perez, does that answer your questions? Okay. Yes. All right. Does anyone, Councillor Harvey, I can see a hand, but is that an old hand or a new hand? I think it's an old hand.
It is an old hand, but I do have questions. But
okay, and then Councillor Thorley, I'll come to you.
Maybe Matt would like to go first, because I've just putting my questions into coherent sentences. Sorry.
Okay. Councillor Thorley, go ahead.
I can't promise mine will be coherent sentences either. Just a quick comment on the quality of the accommodation. As I understand it, the open plan living space you reference on the lower ground floor, it was a slash bedroom. And I think a lot of my concern arises from how the unit's laid out with the, if you will, the habitable accommodation downstairs in the basement, which we know the floor to ceiling is less good. And then this very odd layout on the lower ground floor. And for me, I just find that a very difficult layout to understand, particularly when you've got wardrobes, chest of drawers, beds in there. You are blocking out a lot of light going in. So I say I have a real issue with the layout of the accommodation. But my question, because I appreciate we've covered that to death, related to the what a number of the objectives mentioned, the construction method statement. I think there was a reference to policy DC11. I'm terribly sorry if I got that wrong. Given the sensitive nature of this site, given its location in the conservation area, do officers deem it appropriate in these circumstances to have a construction method statement? And if not, why not? And what are the rules regarding it?
Tom, are you able to take that for us?
Yes, my understanding on this one is that there was actually a construction method statement submitted, but it wasn't authored, so it wasn't necessarily one, it didn't meet all the criteria within that policy DC11, which is the correct one that you referenced. This is discussed in the officer report, and we have looked at it. We've put a condition on saying essentially before they do any further work, they'll need to provide the more detailed, essentially authored construction method statement to ensure that, you know, the actual formal digging out of that basement area is done correctly and there isn't any damage done down the line in the future. And we think that is sufficient to ensure compliance with the requirements and the overall objectives of that particular policy. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify, it's not a requirement before you secure planning, but you've conditioned it in the event planning were granted.
I need to get the actual wording of the condition before me.
Oh, do you want me? Sorry, I can jump in if you like, Tom.
Yeah.
I think the basement policy in our local plan would normally seek these things to be front loaded. The policy is obviously covers all basement extensions across the borough. So we're talking from, you know, small ones to, you know, very large commercial basement extensions. So, you know, it covers the whole range. Now, in this particular application, we have given, you know, weight to the fact that this is a relatively modest basement excavation, given there's already a lower ground floor, and they would simply be digging down to a relatively modest depth beyond the existing, or what was the existing. And also the excavation stays within the footprint of the existing dwelling unit. So given the kind of scale and nature of the excavation, we felt it was acceptable to condition the requirements around engineers' reports and method statements. So indeed, we've attached condition 3 and 4. Condition 3 in particular requires a very detailed structural engineer's report and method statement, which is bespoke for the site. So we have, before works commence, we're convinced that this is going to be a safe and secure excavation and construction works. And as I say, this has to be submitted and approved prior to commencement. And then furthermore, there in condition 4, there would need to be a logistics plan and construction management plan, which again would need to be submitted in advance and approved by us.
I thank you both for that answer. I do understand what you're saying in terms of the conditions. I just personally feel that when we're in effect being asked to grant consent for what is a lower ground and basement accommodation, given we've got, if you will, half a construction methodology assessment in and we're not satisfied with it, we would have asked for it more to maybe to give me more comfort that what we're approving will actually be done. But I think we've covered that point, so I will hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thorley. Councillor Harvey, can I come to you?
Hello, may I just pick up on that point, Matt? Because I read in one of the applicant's objections that there was information around where the floor has already been removed or lowered, that we shouldn't be basing it on that already having happened. And I'm not entirely sure I follow it, but are we basing our decision on how the property is at the moment, with the changes that were made that I believe maybe shouldn't have been made, or should we be basing it on what the property was. Does that?
No, sorry, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense, Councillor Harvey. The short, simple answer is that we are assessing the application on what is proposed and what's shown on the plans. Now, if those plans are approved and they carry out something different, then obviously they're liable to enforcement action. Now, in relation to any work they may have already carried out, then it wouldn't be expedient or sensible for us to start considering any enforcement action until obviously this planning permission, or this planning application has gone through its assessment and the decision making side. So if this is approved, they have to carry out in accordance with the plans. If it's refused, then they may be liable to enforce an action against any unauthorised work they may have already carried out on site. But certainly, it wouldn't. If you like, yeah, I guess that's the hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So the fact that they may have carried out unauthorised work, we don't consider that within our decision.
No, that has no bearing on the application before us. As I said, I mean, it doesn't prejudice what action we may take in the future. Obviously, if we approve the scheme and they then continue the works and they comply with the approved drawings, then obviously there's no issue. But if it's refused, then obviously that's different. They may be liable to enforce an action. They may seek again to authorise the works through a new planning application. Obviously, we don't know. They may well appeal if we did refuse, and then obviously we would need to wait for that appeal process to work through. It wouldn't be sensible or expedient to consider any action, prior to that.
Okay, so my next question then is going back to the kitchen, because I just want to be really clear about it. So from the kitchen diner, so my understanding is that there would be no ventilation in the kitchen. Is that correct?
So, sorry, Matt.
No, Tom, go ahead.
You go.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm just having another look at the plans, but yes, that is my understanding, that there isn't sort of specific ventilation shown at the moment. However, if they did want to install some, they'd have to, if it needs planning permission, they have to come back and apply for that.
Okay.
I would also add, if it may help Councillor Harvey, that they will need to obviously comply with building regulations, which would, I'm not an expert, but would obviously cover aspects of ensuring, ventilation and other safety measures are in place. I would, quite simply, we don't have a policy, because it does fall into the realms of building control. We simply don't have policies that would cover that. That's something that would be regulated under different legislation.
So does that mean when we're considering whether it would be a comfortable property, if we agreed the permission, that we shouldn't factor into things like ventilation, potential for mold and damp on people on that property itself, but also the property next to it as well, because there could be an impact on the property next to it?
Essentially, I mean, if somebody, we're assessing against the local, the development plan. Now, if any, I guess with any sort of permission for any sort of development or basement, I mean, we wouldn't seek to, regulise or control through planning how people decide to, or what conditions people decide to live in. You would assume, people will want to, not live in a mouldy basement, and that they will put in measures that will ensure that it's a habitable and of comfortable standard of accommodation. And indeed, building, I'm not an expert, but I would expect the building regulations would also exercise control and requirements in that respect. But in terms of planning, no, we wouldn't seek to exercise control in or preempt how they might decide to sort of ventilate it or otherwise.
Okay, just looking at the conditions on page 12, number 11, I mean, that talks about the basement floor space not being converted to use as a separate dwelling. It doesn't, there's no condition that says that this can't be changed from a kitchen diner into another room, or because separate dwelling is like a separate flat, isn't it? Or,
yeah, so
if you wanted to turn it into a great big bedsit of lots of people on different floors, on the diner floor and the top floor, then you could do.
Yeah, so the intention of that condition is to make sure it doesn't get subdivided into 2 units where you have 1 unit at lower ground floor and 1 unit entirely at basement floor. So that's the intention of that condition. Yes, someone who lived there could potentially move rooms around like anyone can in any dwelling. So it's not something we would normally seek to control. So someone could potentially have more than 1 bedroom in there. It's an internal change that, yeah, like I say, we wouldn't seek to specifically control that, because it's sort of going back to the discussion that we had earlier, talking about putting the rug, for example, over the structural glass. It's sort of at the discretion of whoever's living there, how they want to live. Yeah, so I hope that answers it to an extent. I mean, you could potentially think about some other conditions, but I don't think it's necessarily appropriate to try and limit how people use different rooms within the dwelling that they live.
Councillor Harvey, does that answer your question?
Sort of. I suppose then I wonder, then why have we even got this as a condition? If that's the case, I suppose I'm trying to get my head around it, because on the one hand, there's nothing to stop someone from using it as separate dwellings, but just not have it formally separated out, I suppose. But you're saying that could happen anywhere anyway. So does that mean it's irrelevant to us to give any consideration to it?
So
the light, etc.
Yeah, so obviously if they were separated into 2, you'd have one that was entirely subterranean and they wouldn't have any other room that they could use, because they wouldn't have the lower ground floor level that they would be able to use. Whereas if they chose, for example, to somehow, I don't know, swap the kitchen and bedroom round, which is their choice potentially down the line, they would still have a room that isn't entirely at basement level. So they'd still have a choice in terms of, you know, what room to occupy with different things. Whereas if it's 2 separate units, you have a whole different set of considerations. You know, for example, it might need more refuse storage. It might need various other things that we don't have to factor in when we're looking at an extension to an existing unit. So that's why we sought to specifically control that, but not necessarily specifically control how they use different rooms within that one dwelling.
Okay.
Did you have anything further?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. I might need to just take a moment or 2 on it. Could I just, while I'm processing what you just said, can I just go to the windows on the roof? So do we know what the view will be like from the property from 32? What it's going to look like for them? Because I think one of the images you showed what it currently looks like, the top of the roof. So do we know what it will look like? Have we seen any images so we can understand the impact it will have on the people at number 32?
So the images we have, we have a photo taken from 32, which is what I showed, and then we have the roof plan of the proposal, which includes those 8 roof lights. So that is what you will then see from that window. So I think you could see that from that photo, looking out of part of number 32, you can look towards the roof of number 32A, and there will be 8 roof lights on there, which they'll be able to see.
Yeah. I guess I'm struggling to visualize how that would look with the 8 windows in what looks like quite a small space.
Do you want me to show? Do you want me to show the photo again? Would that help?
Yeah.
If you share your screen with us, Tom.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
So there's the roof as existing. And I think as I discussed, obviously this roof is being replaced. And then, so if you just bear that photo in mind, and then I'll flick down to the proposed roof plan. But you've obviously now got it fresh in your mind, what it looks like at the moment. Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, could you just say, because I think in the report it says it's something like 3.5 away from the window, but could you just give an indication with your button whereabouts that's likely to be?
Well, I'll need to go to the plan again.
Okay.
So just bear with me. Yeah. So
would that just be completely flat, or would they be raised? Would they?
So on the section drawing, you can see they're very, very slightly raised above the level of the roof. But
how much is that though? I can't.
It's not by much. So
that condition 8, Tom, condition 8 should not protrude more than 150 millimeters.
Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, so I don't. Yeah, so the plans, it's not actually specified there, although like I discussed earlier, they're scale drawings. But as Matt just mentioned, condition 8 specifically says they can't protrude more than 150 mil from the existing roof slope. So they won't be able to stick out a significant amount above the flat roof. So yeah, essentially they'll be very close to that roof level. Did you want me to go back to the photo again, or?
Yeah, I suppose I'm just trying to understand it from the residents that live at 32, what the impact will be on them.
Yeah,
it's quite difficult to.
I think that the other thing to bear in mind was that previously there were roof lights proposed on a bigger, on an enlarged roof, and that wasn't. I don't think that was it definitely wasn't a reason for refusal when the appeal was dismissed. So that's just something to bear in mind. But I think you can see here the edge of the wall of number 32A is just there. So you get a bit of an idea of, it is reasonably close to the edge of that wall. I'm not sure if you can see that wall on the photo.
Oh, so the wall that you just pointed to,
it's there. Yeah, it's just here. So you can see the sort of the detail, or the parapet wall there, and then you've got the roof lights a bit further back than that.
So looking at the image that you showed of the 8 roof windows, they look nearer to that wall than further away, which is what I thought you were saying originally. So now I'm seeing it differently. It's like they're actually nearer to the property, because that wall at the top of the picture, nearer to it, I thought it was at the bottom.
It's that wall there. And I believe, though, that photo would have been taken from back here.
Okay. Councillor, who is the sky? What are the skylights? Sorry.
So they are part of number 32.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And can I just ask one other thing as well in relation to that? Because I did read that in one of somewhere that there were blinds could be put up, which could block out light pollution, but there's nothing in the conditions that refer to that. So that leaves it open for there to be, light pollution. If you're making a decision that there won't be light pollution because they're going to put blinds up, but there's nothing in the conditions say blinds need to be put up, then that doesn't, we're making a decision on something we don't know will definitely happen.
Yeah, so the inspector, in looking at the previous appeals, they did look at this, particularly the sort of light spillage aspect. And they ultimately concluded that, potentially blinds could be added to resolve that. I'm just looking through the conditions at the moment. I don't know.
It's not there. I couldn't see it anyway.
Yeah.
I don't think you could condition someone to have blinds up all the time anyway. It's probably worth saying.
Yeah, it's just the inspector talked about, potentially that would resolve it, and that would be quite a normal scenario in that most people obviously at night would be seeking to close blinds to avoid light spillage or overlooking into their property. I would assume that was the way the inspector was going with it.
But would you really be doing that with roof windows? Because yeah, I could understand doing a normal window, but when it's up high and it's part of the roof, I'm just wondering how much you've given weight to that in relation to light pollution and the impact it's going to have on number 32.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, Councillor, is the concern that light from the roof lights would be unacceptable or potentially unacceptable in terms of light pollution to the occupants at 32?
Can you say that again, Matt?
I'm just trying to understand, is Councillor Harvey's concern that there would be light coming from the roof lights would be unacceptable or potentially unacceptable in terms of impact on occupants at 32 from their rear windows? Is that the concern?
Yes, that's your
that
question,
is,
isn't it?
Yeah, because you can't compel someone, as it's already been said, that you can't compel someone to put up blinds, and you presume they might put up blinds on a normal window, but most people I know that have roof windows don't put up blinds because they like to look out of it and look at the stars. So that impact on number 32 if blinds aren't put up.
Yeah, I mean, it's largely inherent that kind of where we are with an established residential use in this location. I mean, you would not, certainly if this was a cleared site, we wouldn't. I think it's safe to say we wouldn't entertain a new build residential unit in this location. It is what it is, though. There's an existing unit there. The applicant is trying to improve the situation, bring it back into a kind of suitable standard of accommodation. Now, to that end, they're seeking to maximise the light they should get in, particularly as they've got, this existing lower ground floor level, which indeed they're looking to, excavate even further to improve the standard of accommodation and the amount of floor space. An important point would be to try and maximise light coming down through the roof. So I think we would struggle to consider there was unacceptable levels of light pollution going back up to the rear windows of 32. I'm not sure. Well, we certainly don't consider there would be sufficient light spillage from a relatively small and modest residential unit in this location coming out of those 8 roof lights and unacceptably impacting on the amenity of the occupants of 32. When we haven't had a light assessment carried out, we didn't feel that was necessary. And given the distances and the size of those roof lights, we didn't consider there would be unacceptable light spillage in that respect.
Was that, Matt, was that based on there being blinds put up and people at number 32 shutting their curtains?
No, I think it's we wouldn't expect, I agree with you, Councillor, I wouldn't expect a prospective occupier to seek to block lights coming out of those roof lights by installing blinds or any other kind of cover internally. I would expect them to be open. I mean, that's my personal view. But it's certainly not something we felt we needed to exercise control over through a condition.
Councillor Harvey, is that everything for you?
Yeah, I think so. I was just trying to find where it talks about the light from this light pollution in the report, but I'm just not sure where it is. Sorry.
Can you point us towards that in the report, Tom? And then I'll come to Councillor Harcourt next and then Councillor Thorley.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just looking now. Sorry, bear with me.
That's fine.
It is on the windows, my point, just so you're aware.
Councillor Harcourt, is your question about the windows?
I think this might actually be at page 36, but it's based on the probability that someone might put blinds up and someone might pull the curtains.
So
is it 3.43?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Tom, you have just to talk committee through your assessment.
Yeah, so within that particular paragraph, it does go back to some extent to the inspector's decision, where, yeah, I mean, to be fair, they are saying it could be mitigated to an extent if the windows were to be fitted with blinds that could be pulled to limit light spillage. Yeah, and he or she was talking about the occupants of 32 Verica Road potentially pulling their curtains at those particular times. But we have gone on to say, it's also noted the current application has omitted most of the roof lights closest to the first floor windows of 32 Verica Road, with the nearest one being 3.5 metres away, and they're of a small size, 0.5 square metres each. Therefore, we've concluded that the additional openings would not result in such an adverse light pollution to number 32 to warrant refusal of the application.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Councillor Thorley, your question is on the windows. Councillor Harcourt, is your question on the windows?
Not, sorry, not directly, no.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, I will be on roof lights, but not specifically on the light pollution issue, no.
All right, Councillor Thorley.
So it's not specifically on the light pollution issue either. It's about letting light in, but I haven't let Wesley go first.
No, carry on, Matt. Off you go.
Just two quick questions, and I think they are the windows able to be opened, or are they fixed shut? Or do we not know?
Are you talking about the windows on the front elevation, or?
I'm talking about the windows on the roof.
On the roof. Let me. Apologies, I just need to go back to the plan.
I think I read that they were fixed shut, but that might be incorrect.
Yeah, sorry, I just need to double check.
Yeah, no problem, take your time.
Sorry, there's quite a lot of reference to the roof lights in the report, so I'm just trying to find the bit where it actually talks about it.
While you're looking for that, Tom,
yeah,
if I may just pose the wider question. If they are not openable, I suppose what my question is, given they're on a flat roof, given the area they're in, yeah, it's more than likely that a roof of that nature is likely to acquire a number of items on it over the course of months and years that will inhibit light going into the windows. So my question, I suppose, broadly is maintenance. If you can't open them from the inside to address whatever issues you've got, how do you clean them? And therefore, if we can't clean them easily without access to neighbouring properties, I'm just concerned about the overall quality of light over time and how that gets into the building.
I think we're probably looking at page 32.3.25. But I don't think that actually clarifies whether or not the skylights are openable. I think it tells us that the windows in the front elevation are not openable. But I don't think it tells us whether or not the skylights are openable.
That was the paragraph that I was looking at as well, and yeah, I think you're correct that it's talking about the front, the windows in the front being fixed shut, but not specifying about the roof lights. In which case, at the moment, from what I can see, there's no restriction on them being openable, so we can assume they will be openable unless you have, so that may resolve your concern about maintenance or not. I'm not sure how easy it would be to get out and through those particular roof lights, but there may be alternative ways of maintaining the roof. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, at the moment they appear to be openable. I can't see any restriction that we've imposed requiring them to be fixed shut.
No, thank you for that. It just comes back, and I appreciate now stretching beyond what I was permitted, but the unneighbourless point that was raised by objectors, we now have an issue potentially in terms of noise disturbance or an issue in terms of maintenance. So I suppose that was the point I was getting at. But I will go back to you, Chair, because I butted on Wesley's point.
I mean, you could just have a window cleaner come up on your roof and clean those skylights.
How, I suppose, is the question.
On a ladder.
Not easy to access. You do it from the front on the main road.
Yeah, on a ladder. Maybe I'm oversimplifying. I don't know a lot.
I think because it's a flat roof, that's the bigger concern. It's not something you normally have on a pitch roof. But yeah, if that is an easy solution, then great.
The window cleaners have to go on the roof. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it. I don't know a lot about cleaning windows, but
yeah, I think through the chair, I mean, I know that you could quite easily put a ladder up against the front elevation, and the window cleaner, they have those very long poles now, don't they, with the brushes? So we wouldn't perceive an issue with cleaning the windows, or indeed if they were openable, we wouldn't expect, given the intensity of occupation as well as this size would facilitate, we wouldn't anticipate any undue noise and disturbance emanating through the roof lights to the rear windows of neighbouring properties to justify refusing the scheme on potential noise and disturbance.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Councillor Harcourt.
Thank you, Chair. I have the same issue around cleaning windows, I'm sure, as other people do. Reminds me of a song by George Formby.
Let's not go there.
Most people here are too young to remember it. Anyway, more seriously, the roof lights in paragraph 3.33, it refers to views from restricted areas will only be visible from various parts, because I'm starting to look at conservation area issues. So within that, where will they be visible from, apart from obviously 32 Verica Road?
I believe that is the restricted views to which the report is referring. So they won't be visible in the street scene, but there's obviously areas, particularly within neighbouring properties where they would be visible. But within the wider conservation area, they wouldn't be. So I can only assume that that's what the report is referring to.
Okay, so just to be clear, it's not talking about they're visible from the street somewhere or other.
Well, it doesn't specify that, and I can't see where they would be visible from based upon the fact that they're behind a parapet wall and behind a small pitched roof. So I'm not sure where else they would be visible from other than neighbouring properties. I know there is a road behind at the other end of this particular Verica Road terrace, but yeah, like I say, these roof lights are behind a parapet wall.
It seems an odd statement to include in the report then, to be honest with you.
I would assume it's because it's been raised in representation over time, so perhaps that's why it's been responded to specifically, and probably because of previous schemes where there were more visible elements that did have a wider impact on the conservation area. So obviously you need to contrast that when you've got a scheme which doesn't necessarily make those changes which impact on the conservation area.
Okay, presumably we were talking earlier about I think it was Councillor Harvey talked about the kitchen and whether there's any ventilation or extractor fans or anything like that. Presumably if building control turn around and say there needs to be some form of extractor fan, given the position of that property between two buildings, that would have to then come back to planning for permission as to where that flue or the exit of that flue is.
Yes, there's a condition on the condition 10, talked about it not allowing it particularly on the front elevation. So just making sure it's not just flues, but other various items, making sure they don't appear on the front elevation in terms of the impact on the street scene. But yes, if anything else was to be done that did require planning permission, then it would need to come back to us to, so say if something was required like that, and it needed planning permission, then it would have to come back to us to then look at to determine whether it was in an appropriate location or not. And obviously they will need to comply with building regs in order to finish the build ultimately and have someone live there.
Yeah. So basically, if they need an extractor flue somewhere or other, it couldn't be on the front elevation, but potentially, as there's no condition to this effect, it could be underneath the first floor windows of 32.
Well, only...
Although we wouldn't give permission for that, I'm sure.
Yeah, so if that needed planning permission, then yeah, you would look at the impact on the neighbours, but also there's probably a separate building control issue in terms of where you're actually allowed to locate those sort of flues in relation to neighbouring windows. So I'm sure that would, that would be picked up there as well.
Yeah, I mean, flues and extract flues and such like are things that we've considered, and positioning thereof, the things that we've considered on a number of occasions at this committee. Okay, I'll leave it at that one. The other main area that I want to really look at is the frontage, which is, a pretty important aspect of this application in terms of the conservation area, the historical aspect of it, and the artist and all the rest of the various business. And even the inspector makes comment that, the fact that it's an artist studio and it was part of an area where there have been a number of artists and so on, and that is therefore part of the conservation area and an integral part thereof. So what I'm looking at is really, I think it's condition 5, which talks about any repairs, replacement and so on have to be in a similar sort of brick. But there's nothing to say that, the importance of preserving that particular frontage and preserving all the detailed brickwork that's there as well. And I think that is something that is quite important, given that this is a conservation area and the historic nature and use of that particular building.
Tom, do you want me to cut that off, or?
Yeah, Alan, I'll let you come in. All I was going to say was there is the potential for adding extra elements to that condition, possibly, if it's reasonable to include them. But I think Alan can probably advise better on that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So thank you, Councillor, for the question. I think we obviously with this proposal, the application drawings obviously reference the fact that the external facade will be kind of reinstated through the application proposal.
Sorry, you're very faint.
Sorry, let me just, is that any better now?
A little bit, yeah.
Sorry, yeah. So in terms of the condition does cover off works to make good the existing elevation. I think the detail within the elevation is obviously the fact that the brickwork and the window detail within that is obviously subject to 2 conditions. There's condition 5 relating to the actual repairs of the brickwork and the mortar match the existing. And then there's the second condition, which is the condition 7, which covers the more kind of detailed elements around the windows within the elevation. I think, as Tom mentioned, I think we, obviously in the officer report, we consider those conditions to be relevant enough to actually ensure the restoration of those elevations. I think it would be slightly different if we were dealing with a listed building or a building where, there are certain elements where we'd want those sectional drawings to cover that off, or a detailed method statement if it was non-standard construction. But I think given the fact that the alterations are making good the original elevations in matching brickwork and mortar and point and style to match the existing, we feel that kind of sufficiently covers this.
So you think the condition is strong enough, in your opinion, to stop the applicant from demolishing it and building something, in the same style of brick or the same type of brick? Or making major alterations to that facade, losing the detailed brickwork, coping level?
I mean, just looking at the plans that have been submitted and obviously the description of the development, that would then go to the heart of the commission in terms of the demolition works on actually part of the description of development. So it is about making good the existing elevation and the replacement of the glazing, rather than wholesale demolition and rebuild of the wall. That isn't what we're consenting through the application and through the actual description and development.
Yeah, I mean, okay, the wall might be demolished and rebuilt effectively exactly as it is, but then it's no longer original. So, it's about preserving that. My final point then is, it says somewhere or other, and I can't remember where, but about we were talking about conservation. Sorry, about conservation areas. Oh yes, be again 3.33, 3.34, and so on. Where it talks about the application and changes are likely to do less than significant harm. As far as I recall, where there's a less than significant harm, that then requires public benefit to effectively outweigh that harm. What is the public benefit of doing this?
Yes, thanks for that question, Councillor. So I think if I revert you back to the addendum report, what we've done in the conclusion of the heritage section is obviously just sort to clarify the detail of obviously the harm that is caused in terms of the introduction of the roof lights. We consider that to be to the lowest end of the spectrum of less than substantial harm, i.e. it tips just into that balance. As you mentioned, the actual enhancement of and restoration of the main elevation to the property is obviously something that we see as being the key public benefit, and that was also reported in both the 2017 and 2019 appeal decisions. That the inspector's conclusion on that was actually the restoration of that elevation, as has been mentioned, in terms of the historic significance of the building, plus also its impact upon the conservation areas deemed to be a public benefit that would outweigh some of the harm, given the nature of the current proposal. I think, going back to the earlier appeal decisions, and it's quite clear in the report and the inspector's decisions that the intention of the roofscape that came forward in the earlier applications would weigh the balance completely the other way. So that's where the balance and the conclusion comes into play in terms of our assessment.
Okay, that's. I'm not going to comment on that. I think that's enough from me, I think, for tonight.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Councillor Harcourt. Before I move to the vote, does anyone have anything further? Any further questions before I move to the vote? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Okay. So if I can direct committee's attention to recommendation 1 in the report, also noting the addendum, and you'll find that recommendation actually on page 38 of the report. And that recommendation, that quite simply reads that the application be approved subject to the conditions set out below. So, Councillor Ahern.
Against.
Councillor Harcourt.
Against.
Councillor Harvey.
Against.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
Abstain.
Councillor Thorley.
Against.
And I vote for the application, which is then that recommendation refused. So committee have chosen to vote against that officer recommendation. In which case then, I'm not going to come on to recommendation 2, and instead I'm going to be asking committee for their reasons for refusal. So committee have voted to refuse, to vote against that recommendation and to refuse planning permission. So can I please now, in particular, those members who voted against the recommendation 1, I'd like to get your views on the reasons for refusal. So would anyone like to start me off?
Yeah, I'll start off, Chair. My main reason for voting against the recommendation is I don't think that the basement kitchen and dining is acceptable in the 21st century. It has no window because it's a basement, obviously. It has no fresh air, and it has very, very limited natural light. And I don't think that's acceptable in the 21st century.
So we're talking about substandard living accommodation.
Yeah.
In particular, with particular reference to the kitchen having little ventilation and light. Well, no ventilation.
No ventilation at all at the moment.
No ventilation.
Window, no ventilation.
And little
and
light.
Limited natural light.
Yeah, good point. Limited natural light. Okay, fine. Councillor Thorley, I believe you had a reason for us.
They're exactly the same. Yeah,
Same reason.
The principal reason was inadequate accommodation.
Okay, fine. Anyone else have another reason or a different reason for refusal that they would like to throw in the mix? Councillor Harcourt?
Oh, I didn't know I was saying anything.
You unmuted, so I thought.
Yeah, it's the issue that we discussed a little while ago, which is about the potential for light pollution and light nuisance to the neighbour.
Light nuisance, light pollution. And in particular, we're talking about the affected party being 32.
Yeah, and that's from the roof lights.
Verica Road, specifically from the roof, what are they called?
Sorry,
roof
say
lights?
that again.
Roof lights, are they
roof
called?
Lights, yes.
Is that the word?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's late.
I know.
Roof lights. Any other reasons for refusal? Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, so I second everything that Councillor Ahern and Fawley and Harcourt have said. And the light and noise from the roof lights, and also the potential for noise to come from those roof windows, if they were open. And I just don't feel that it's being addressed enough by officers. It's too much reliance on blinds and curtains, which isn't realistic. Yeah.
Okay, so there's probably not anything new. There's probably not any new reasons in there. It's probably just light nuisance and light pollution from 32 Verica Road.
And
Sorry,
noise.
232 Verica Road.
And noise.
Okay. Noise from roof lights.
And the kitchen and diner for the same reasons.
That one didn't come up.
Sorry, I mean ventilation. So,
okay, ventilation, fine.
Sorry, it's late. Sorry.
Got it. Okay. I think that's probably enough to be getting on with, and I think that probably summarises. And then, unless anyone would like to put forward any other reasons for refusal that that kind of influenced their decision.
Well, again, it's that CMS not able to see the construction method statement. I appreciate there's a condition on that, but I just feel, given the sensitivity of this particular application and the work that's been done to excavate basements, we need to be able to see that it's there in full.
Okay, got it. Okay. Poonam, can I take your guidance now on those reasons committees given for refusal? Obviously, we'll vote on those. But are officers content to take those reasons away for us and is that enough that committee's given you to go on?
I believe it has. There's reasons there, unless planning need any further clarification in respect of the impact of on the neighbours in respect of light pollution. And I think you've also made reference to the substandard living, and the correct policies will be referred to. Unless there's anything else, I've got nothing further to add.
Okay. Matt, have you, I can see you've unmuted yourself. Is there something you wanted to add?
Through the chair, I think it's clear. I think there's enough information from what was discussed previously as well, so we understand.
Okay.
Obviously, not predetermine what is voted on to actually refuse it on, but yeah, those three are pretty clear.
Okay, got it. Right. Oh, there's four actually, Matt. I think there's substandard living accommodation, light nuisance and light pollution from the roof lights. There's noise from the roof lights. and then there is the prior availability of the construction management statement. So it's actually 4 separate reasons, I think, that we're looking at.
Okay, I assumed the light pollution and noise were one and the same, but okay, you're separating those out. Okay, for the vote. Yep, got you.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, committee, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to vote on each of these reasons separately. So number 1 is essentially substandard living accommodation. So that's number 1 reason for refusal. So I need to ask you to vote on each of these in turn. So if you're voting, if you're agreeing with that reason for refusal, just say for, and if you're not, you're against. Okay, and obviously not voting is an option as well. Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Perez.
Not voting.
Okay, Councillor Sadiq.
Abstain.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
And I also vote for the reason for refusal as well. Okay, so that's reason number 1. Reason number 2 was the light nuisance and light pollution from the roof lights. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Perez.
Not voting.
Councillor Sadiq.
Abstain.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
And I also vote for that reason for refusal. Okay, in which case then I'll come on to reason number 3, which was noise pollution from any opening roof lights. And if I can come to Councillor Ahern first.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Perez.
Not voting.
Thank you. Councillor Sadiq.
Abstain. Yeah.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
And I also vote for that reason for refusal. And then the final reason was regarding the lack of prior availability of construction management statement. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Perez.
And not voting.
Councillor Sadiq.
Abstain again.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
And I also vote for that reason for refusal. Okay, that is that item dealt with, and that is our only item of the evening. So that brings our meeting to a close. I'd like to thank everyone for attending or watching tonight's meeting. The draft minutes of this meeting will be published on our website shortly. These will be formally approved at our next meeting, which will be taking place on the 8th of June. If you have any queries concerning the applications in the interim, please contact the case officer listed in the application report. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Right, good night.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.